Welcome to iScope Media. You're watching one-on-one exclusive with iScope Media. Only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile, said Albert Einstein. And that's exactly what doctors do today. Today with us, we have Asia's one of the top. He has given his services across various countries. He is an accomplished, well-renowned urologist and andrologist. His area of work includes kidney stones, prostate-related issues, children's urinary problems, cancer in kidney and urinary tract. Trained from several Apex centers worldwide, he has worked in 4 continents and multicultural environments. He has received various rewards like gold medal in FRCS Urology UK and first prize in robotic surgery contest ROSS American Urology Association, among many others. So here we have Dr. Das in our show today. Welcome to our show, Doctor.
Thank you for the warm welcome and the introduction. It's been a pleasure to be part of your show.
Thank you so much, sir. So starting with this interview, sir, why did you choose the profession of a doctor?
Well, that's a long story. The journey started when I was very young. I was born in Calcutta and my grandfather was quite sick and he was homebound. In those days, we didn't have facilities or, we didn't upfront use to hospitalize patients. So there was a very senior, reputed doctor of Calcutta who used to come those days and see him at home. Whenever he used to come, I used to observe him minutely and see how he used to treat my grandfather. And I used to be very, very impressed by seeing how important the role of a doctor in treating someone, in giving someone a well-being. So important is the contribution of a doctor in someone's well-being of the whole family. So this was the starting point. Then as I grew up, my parents constantly motivated me that I have to do something to help others. And then I thought probably taking up the medical profession would be the best bet for me to try and help others. At that time, little did I know that the profession is so demanding, what it takes to be a doctor, and what it takes to stand in the society to be a doctor. So it went through years of grueling studies. We had a very long study course which we had to do. I had to give up a lot of things during my studies, including friends, quality time, social fronts, everything I had to give up. And I was never available for social events once I started my medical college and in the learning phase. Then after that starts the training phase. I wanted to be a urologist and a kidney transplant surgeon, so that requires quite a bit of rigorous training. So since I was in Kolkata and most of my training was done in Mumbai, I started getting more and more trained in most of the Apex centers in the country, Western India, and then I realized that I have to go further and I have to go further with hard training outside. I chose several Apex centers where I was fortunate to get into, to get all the training which I got in this time. As every time changed, I realized I have to be adept with newer techniques which are coming up so that I can benefit the patient better. And that's how, we keep on adding feathers, and that's where I finished my training and then started the beautiful journey of professional practice. So there, it's easier said than done. So you face the challenges every day with any patients. And as a doctor, you want to help everyone. So you want to feel that, no, I will take up the challenge. I will go out of the way. I will put my best effort to make the patient okay. We win several times, but we lose many times. So, there's a considerable amount of mental strength. We have to stand forward so that we can go through the goods and the bads, and with the same expectation that our patients would be happy, my patients will go home happily and their ailments will be cured. And that's how the life continues and the journey is still on.
Right. So, sir, we all know, like you told us your journey right now, and we know how difficult it is to be a doctor, especially, the time of studying that you give. that's a huge lot of time you give for studying only, and then you come for practicing, and it's a lot of time that we have to actually involve in this particular profession. So we all know how difficult the schedule has been for you as well. So how do you manage the balance, between your personal and professional life?
This is a Yorker. It's probably the hardest question for me to tackle than tackling it. So I am blessed with a very supportive family. My parents, who motivated me to be a doctor, happily accepted my constant absence from my family affairs, from any family events. My wife, who is a reputed doctor and an equal aspirant as me, follows a similar routine where patients and their concerns come first and family is in the backseat. My children soon started realizing that their parents' professions are demanding, and they have accepted this. We balance out by staying together at every free time we get in our day-to-day lives. And that's probably the best balance we keep between our personal and professional life. That's the most we can do. Honestly, when patients are cured of their ailment and they go home happily, that mitigates all the deficits we have in our personal.
Right. So I had this curious thing in my head. Since years, actually, I had this curious thing in my head. So doctor's life is really, really difficult. Like, we can get a call at 2 o'clock at night. We can get a call in the morning also. We can get a call for emergency at any time of our life. Right. So is it actually easier when your life partner is a doctor?
It's a big benefit because, both of us having a similar mentality helps us. When I want to go for any advanced training, she understands fully that this is required to give better patient care. And when equally she is doing something, I understand fully, no, this is a responsible job and we have to do our best. If we are not well trained, we add something else. If we have lack of knowledge, we add something else. But there should be no compromise in patient care. That's very important.
Right, perfect. So we all know that Dr. Das also works also include, treating the kidney stones. So doctor, tell our audience some tips about how to avoid getting kidney stones and how dangerous is that?
Correct. So kidney stones are one of the commonest complaints I encounter in my practice. And there's a lot to speak about them. Most stones which we encounter are calcium stones. And they are mostly, the outcome of very deranged lifestyle over years. Of course, the environment also plays a role. Few are genetically related and they usually run families. Coming back to, the commonest type of stones or whichever stone you have, the most important advice which I give to my patients is hydration. To take care of drinking simple and pure water, normal water. So our recommendation or my recommendation at present is around 2.5 liters of water if you are on a normal daily life routine. However, those who are in active sports or those who are working outdoors in very hot, humid climates would sweat a lot, need to replenish adequately because these people get easily dehydrated. A word of caution for people who are predominantly working in air-conditioned environments. In these environments, we don't realize the insensible loss. So we get easily dehydrated and we don't get thirsty. So we don't focus on drinking water. And that's when it goes on for years, we have a higher incidence of stone formation risk. Kidney stones usually start as small in the kidneys and then they grow larger. Many of them can pass down the kidney, so they can lead to a sudden acute attack of pain, which can completely incapacitate you. You can be very sick suddenly, requiring emergency attention. Neglected kidney stones can be quite dangerous, especially big stones. They can even lead to renal failure. Patients can get infection. They can lead to blood in urine. So there are several consequences, of having kidney stones. Being a transplant surgeon, many times we see neglected stones which were never the patient was aware of, comes back with a kidney failure which could have been prevented. So what I suggest my patients, as part of, because most are doing annual health checkups nowadays, I suggest them to all adults to do a baseline ultrasound, because that's probably one of the very, very basic tests, which is not very harmful, easy, and to just go through and get an idea whether they have any problems with their kidneys at this point. And based on that, we can decide, whether a periodic monitoring is required, whether any intervention is required, whether any, hydration and just lifestyle changes are required. This is what would be the best bet. Obesity, then, the modern lifestyle, sedentary lifestyle, fast food, these are also very high risk for kidney stone development. So definite focus on lifestyle is advised. The commonest type of kidney stone which we see is calcium oxalate. So certain foods like spinach, rhubarb, French fries, nuts, they are oxalate-rich foods. So there's a long list of oxalate-rich foods which are available online and easily accessible for anyone to go to. And these can be avoided in those who have kidney stones. You have to remember, once you form a kidney stone, there's a higher risk of developing another kidney stone subsequently. So these are very important. Diabetics have a higher risk of developing uric acid stones. So they need to be periodically monitored, keep an eye, have a regular health visit. And that's probably the best way, to focus on prevention and make sure that you are healthy.
So I think I'm not pretty sure if this is a myth that I had heard when I was a kid, that this duck meat has a lot of heat in it. So my grandmom used to tell me that eat duck meat because that can even melt the stones in your kidneys. Or if anyone has stones in their kidneys, it can melt it. Is that true, or is it just a myth or something that our ancestors or someone said?
Probably just a myth. I am very open to all ideas. I get many advices from my patients who are open and who come down and say, "Doctor, in our tradition, this is what is done, that is what is done." See, I cannot challenge because we don't have the scientific evidence in it. But overall, hydration is what I always focus in. I tell people I'm very flexible. If you are happy in taking some particular type of food and you feel that's going to help you, you can take, but you have to keep your hydration good, because only when we have a good urine fraction, that's the only way to make sure that you are not having a concentrated urine. And that's the first nidus, or that's the first source for stone formation. It all starts from a very concentrated urine where all the particles in our urine settle down. So I don't think anything can work better than hydration. But all other suggestions, if someone's very obsessed with particular idea, we are always open. We never make sure that no, this is not appropriate.
Yeah, right. So moving on, I'm really interested to know, you have done a lot of surgeries in your life. I'm sure we can't even count them on our fingers. But which has been your most difficult surgery?
So it was, in terms of transplant, because I do transplants and non-transplant surgery, and sometimes it's very difficult to explain to common patients because it's surgery, it's very acute happenings. So one of my transplant patients, while I was in India, had a major bleed while we were disconnecting the kidney from its main arterial connection, and had lost a huge amount of blood. It was very stressful, but we were fortunate because all these are done in a very well-equipped center with a lot of people involved, and we had to protect the kidney also. So it was very, very tricky situation, very demanding. We had to control the bleeding in the patient and make sure the kidney which is transplanted is well functioning, so that there is no problem to either side. So that was probably the most challenging transplant surgery which happened in my career, which I will never forget. The amount of stress I went through with this massive bleeding, because it was the connection from the major artery had tore off while we were trying to disconnect. So this was a very, very significant event. Apart from that, the other most noteworthy, in last few years has been a very difficult reconstruction, which I did. I had to repair the ureter, which is a tube going from the kidney, and I had to put a graft taking all the way from the cheek to put it laparoscopically inside. So it was because this patient was previously operated and we had a lot of difficulty in doing that. The surgery was very prolonged and it was very stressful because we had to preserve the kidney, restore the kidney function. So this was one of the other surgeries I will always remember in my life.
Hats off to you, sir, actually. So we know you have worked across many countries and continents and multi-cultural places, environments. So how different is working culture for a doctor in other countries when compared to India?
Well, working out of India is a complete different experience than working inside India. The volume of patients are definitely less. You don't get the large volume because the population in India and the population in any other country cannot be compared. So parallelly, we have less patients, but we have to keep the work to the highest standards. That's a mandate.
Right.
So most patients who come to our consultation or clinic, they are very well read and they have already sought opinion from several experts in their country or in other countries because they are also working. They keep changing. So they have already got several opinions and they are coming to get your up-to-date knowledge. They want to make sure that you have skills which are at par with international standards because they always have access to international standards. So that's very important that you have to always, upgrade your knowledge to what's happening currently. Skills, if there are any new techniques coming, you have to get versed with it so that the patient who comes in, you are able to offer. Then, we have to spend much longer time in communication with the patient because the patients need a lot of explanation, a lot of lifestyle advices. So we have, because we are much less patient, so we give more time to each patient to talk to them, understand what they want, because many just come for counseling also. They don't want an acute treatment, but they want to know what can be done because they have 2-3 opinions from all sides. So they are very confused at what should be done. And probably they'll be doing the procedure in their own country, but they just want to know what has been advised as is appropriate. Then, of course, in India, our patients are Indians.
Right.
So, and our work is usually compared with our Indian patients who are all in one type of, they are very skillful, but they work in a particular way. But when you're working outside, many of the patients are from many different continents. So they have their preset minds, they have their own attitudes towards the doctor. Colleagues are many Europeans or Americans work with you. So, if you have a different work culture, work ethics is very different. Respect is very different. You are well respected amongst your colleagues. Yes. I'm not saying you're not respected in India, but definitely, it's a lot of polishness when you come out of India. And that's what makes your perspective to deal patients is much different than when I was working in India, than what I developed. Also of note, what I see from my practice, that the work hours being lesser than in India, here the doctors can pay more attention to their own health and well-being, which is also important. We have a very stressful life, long work hours, very bad routine. So we don't get time to look after ourselves. Right. So, but when we are out of India, doctors have some time to look into their own health, because if I am not well, I can't take care of you. So this is also one thing which is very important to know what is out of India that gives us a little better, in terms of our daily well-being.
Yeah. So since urology is also one of your specialty, what advices would you want to give the parents to ensure the well-being of their children?
See, firstly, what I always would say, because I do pediatric urology and I see a lot of parents coming unaware of their children's condition. So I would recommend, because most children, when they are born, they don't come to a urologist. They go to their pediatrician. So they should ask the pediatrician in detail, was there during the birth or during the pre-birth session when they were undergoing radiological assessment. They should ask the gynecologist or the obstetrician who's taking care that are my baby's kidneys or the urinary system okay? Because many are not aware that there was a problem there which can have consequences after the baby. So every antenatal checkup, which we say, they should have a focus, make sure that the child who is being born is going to have a normal functioning urinary system.
Right.
If not, they should have some idea as to where to go, what to do, what sort of protocol, or who is there who can deal with the situation in a most appropriate. Most times, the babies will be following up with pediatricians, with their vaccines, with their cough, cold, and everything. And those get attention, whereas they may be having something from birth, which gets completely unnoticed. As the child grows up, the parent should focus on ensuring a good urinary habit to the child. Many times we are seeing that we don't influence the children to have a good voiding pattern. Voiding pattern means the child should go and empty bladder at regular intervals. Many children, they hold urine till it's the last moment and then they have leakage of urine. They're incontinent. They should also make sure that there is no constipation, because many times we are having bladder-related issues and bowel-related issues, constipation going hand in hand. One aggravates the other, and this also is very important. Any sort of problems which they are encountering, if the pediatrician is telling them, they should make sure that they have met an expert in the field to understand what is the condition, what requires, because some of these require long-term observation in a particular pattern. Most times we see a child comes with severe infection, gets admitted, and maybe it's the urinary system which is contributory, whereas the child only had fever, never had urinary problems. So we get these scenarios. In terms of boys, it's very important that the parents make sure that they have a good genital exam, make sure the genitalia in the boys are properly, because there is scenario where the testicles can be undescended, they can be higher up. So there are birth-related issues, so that at least if they don't understand when they're meeting a pediatrician, they should be inquired. As a child subsequently grows up, it is very important to stress on good hydration. Make sure that the development of good habits of hydrating and emptying bladder properly, make sure they are away from fizzy drinks, because this is something also what we are always mentioning. Nowadays everything is fast food, so Pepsi, Cola, all this, these are called fizzy drinks. So they are very much irritant to the bladder. If they are being taken on a regular note, we have a lot of overactive bladder, which happens just because of our lifestyle for years. So this is also very important. And then, whenever there is any problem which they are not able to understand, or if the child has any acute urinary issues, actually suffering from urine control, bedwetting, they shouldn't consider, okay, this is normal, this can resolve. There's no harm in taking an opinion. So, even if it is normal and someone tells you, a pediatric urologist who deals with these tells you, okay, this is normal and this will resolve, nothing to worry, then it's an added assurance. But never know at this time, maybe something come up which needs a treatment and which, if would have been addressed earlier, would have not had long-term consequences. So that's what my advice is to get, and they should know to, consult a child urologist whenever they have a doubt. That's what would be my suggestion.
Right. To all the parents in our audience, you can rewind back this video and watch this particular part of the video once again, because it is very important, to ensure your children's health. So moving on, one of your area of interest is robotic surgery. And can you tell us more about it a little? Because the first thing that came into my head when I heard this robotic surgery is, are there robots who do the surgery? And I also wanted to know, how safe are robotic surgeries?
Right. See, robotic surgery is a version of minimally invasive surgery. What is minimally invasive surgery? What do we mean by it is we are performing surgery without big cuts in the stomach. So we are doing the work by small holes, creating small holes in your tummy to access the area of interest. Suppose if we are operating on the kidney or the bladder or the gallbladder or whatever area we are operating, instead of making a big cut, which we used to do conventionally in older days, we access it in a smaller area. The benefit is always a less pain, scar is less, cosmesis is early recovery, early pain. So the first generation of these type of surgery was laparoscopy, which came up in the 1980s, 1990s. It started, and then it got popularized in urology more from 1993 and more towards N90s and early 2000s. What was seen over a period of time that it was working well and most surgeries could be completed, but whenever it was in the area of prostate cancer or any organ very deep inside the body, the surgeons were facing hurdles by finishing the surgery by laparoscopy. So they needed a better way of doing it. The robot is definitely a device. It's a device which has multiple arms, and once we create the axis, this is connected to the patient, and the surgeon is controlling these arms from outside. And advantage is we can work with more than two arms. Normally, a surgeon, every human, we have two arms, and we can't have a third arm. We have to ask an assistant to do another work, which is a different person doing your work. So tandem, working in tandem, understanding the same balance. Sometimes, and then, tremor, other errors come in because many times we have our own tremor. The advantage of robot is precision. So what happens is we can do the same surgery with much more precision, much better outcome. Patient comfort is preserved because we are still going through small accesses. And then the surgeon fatigue, because if it's a difficult surgery and if the surgeon has to perform 2-3 similar surgeries in the day, because laparoscopy requires a lot of shoulder and arm involvement. In robotics, because it's a mechanical arm, the surgeon doesn't get tired. So the surgeon fatigue is also less. And then, the procedure outcome becomes different because if the surgeon is not that fatigued and he can do things with precision, with multiple arms, definitely the results of the surgery is much better than anywhere else. So this robotic surgery actually started in the USA in 2003 and started getting popular. And now currently all over the world, it's very much in use. The cost, because it involves a very sophisticated machine, is currently the main limitation of using it universally. But subsequently, I strongly believe in the next decade, because as technology is developing, we are getting cheaper versions of many are in the pipeline to bring up a cheaper version. And I think in next 2 decades, probably all surgeries will convert to robotic, because that's how things change from open to laparoscopy. And now we are seeing most surgeons who are doing laparoscopy is changing to robotic. It's just like, you step up or you update yourself with one or the other newer techniques to give a better benefit to the
patient. Right. So it's completely safe.
It's completely safe. Yes. There is no issues with the only limit cost, but in terms of patient recovery, it's very good. It's very well. Cost is not an issue. Probably every surgery would turn to robotic when it is in the abdominal cavity. Nowadays, we are doing for the neck also. So, there are a lot of applications.
Right. So before we run out of time, I really wanted to know why we know how comfortable corporate hospitals are, and we know that you have entered and you're working in a clinic. So why are you actually working in a clinic, leaving that comfort life of a corporate hospital?
Well, this is a very sensitive question. Yes, truly, I moved out from a very reputed corporate hospital and started practicing in a clinic. And I do agree, yes, fully agree, corporate hospitals are well equipped, have multi-speciality departments, so you get a very good support system. and taking care of complex patients are much better care of. I realized that while I was in a corporate hospital gives you fame, assured earnings, and comfortable work hours. But somewhere I felt a deficit. Many patients were hesitant to attend, considering the expenses they will bear in a corporate, because corporates are expensive. So certain patients were unable to afford my surgeries because the prices in a corporate were not matching to their capacities. And they had to do surgeries at other institutes where they could afford, but the facilities were not up to the mark. Right. So I thought of this and I wanted to balance this out. In an individualized practice, there is a lot of uncertainty, but you have the freedom to choose how you want to work. So I can cater to patients who are unable to attend the corporate hospitals due to financial constraints and perform surgeries at prices which are more affordable to them and get individualized care. Because now, once I am in a clinic, I work in a clinic, I have access to more hospitals where I can take my patients and do the surgery depending on their capacity, so that they are not deprived of good care. And there are additional advantages which I thought I would be able to give. I can give them individualized care. I will have access to all the state-of-the-art equipment to offer quality care. Whichever are not there in the hospitals, we are getting them in the clinic under a, which we will be keeping in the other hospitals, so that whenever I need to perform a surgery for my patient, I can use these equipment. Not a single corporate may not have all the facilities. So, but if it's my practice, because it's dedicated urology practice, all the patients should get the best benefit in terms of the most advanced category possible. What I also feel is here in my own practice, patients can directly access me. Whereas when I'm in the boundary of corporate, many times it's a hurdle to get to a doctor. So I have a focal point. People can always reach me. Those who I went to perform the surgery in the middle of the night, they have any problem, they will have an easy access to it. Instead of going through the corporate, the phone desk, and then people not answering their calls. Sometimes it becomes very distressing for the patient that they are not getting through the doctor to know just the right advice. I took this further, by creating my own website, which we launched recently. And this is fully focused on patient information. So all the corporate websites just tell about packages and what can be done and what this. But this is more about patients' different health conditions. What type of surgeries? What are the benefits? So it is fully dedicated to my patients. I'm creating my social media so that where the focus is not advertisements or anything. The focus is more of health-related information. Maybe some lifestyle, urological health-related lifestyle tips, or some advices on the newer surgeries and their advantages. Because many times we know what is a robotic surgery, but we are not sure what exactly the benefit. Many would probably need to meet the doctor to know it. But if I can reach them through a social media, they will be more aware of what are current happenings. So if required, they can ask their doctors, the doctor, this is the current technique, and I want to go for this technique. Can I do it here? So it will facilitate them. It will give them more knowledge. So this is my goal, to move out from the corporate. Bahrain offers a great workplace for expats. His Majesty, Crown Prince, Royal Family, local authorities, and all Bahrainis are very kind to the expats. And my clinic owner was generous enough to give me a space to fulfill my goals. Now only time will tell whether my decision is right.
Yes, sir. So, like a perfect man has said, that God could not be everywhere, so he sent doctors. And here with us, we have this amazing personality, this amazing doctor who has been in multicultural places, environments, has a lot of specialities. And you can go back into the video and see how amazing personality he is. So thank you for coming to our show, Doctor. It has been an amazing and my pleasure to come and host this show today.
Thank you so much for the good time and your being a part of your show. And it was really nice and a big honor for me to be here. And it was a wonderful experience for me as well.
Thank you so much, sir. So to all the audience watching this was Dr. Das, and this is your host, Aparna Singhdev, now signing off.